The emergency klaxons had been screaming for 3 hours before I realized the human was late. I checked my data slate again, mandibles clicking in irritation. Professor Kira Vale, scheduled to arrive at Station Theta-Nine exactly 47 minutes ago. The docking bay sensors confirmed her shuttle had attached successfully, that her biometric scan had cleared, that she'd even requisitioned a temporary quarters assignment. Yet here I stood, Second Administrator Vrell of the Galactic Education Consortium, tapping my tertiary limbs against the polished floor, while the station's defensive grid lit up the viewport behind me like some twisted festival display. Administrator, my assistant, a young Threxian named Polk, approached with his usual nervous energy. The Voidborn incursion at Sector 7 has been neutralized. Captain Remick reports that Professor Vale personally eliminated 16 hostiles before our security teams could even scramble. I felt my chromatophores flush an embarrassed purple. 60. Correction. Polk consulted his own slate, eyes widening. 23. She continued, engaging while the airlocks were cycling. Of course she did. Humans. Always so delightfully inconvenient with their tendency to treat mortal danger as a mild scheduling conflict. The conference hall doors slid open, and I composed myself, adjusting my ceremonial sash and preparing my most diplomatic greeting. What walk through those doors made my primary heart skip exactly 2 beats. Professor Kira Vale stood roughly 1.7 meters tall, which put her at eye level with my thorax. Her hair, that strange mammalian fur they grew from their scalps, was pulled back in what I'd learned humans called a ponytail, though I'd yet to understand the etymology. Dark brown strands escaped the binding, plastered against her forehead with what I sincerely hoped was Voidborn ichor and not her own blood. Her clothing, what had presumably started the day as professional academic attire, now featured several prominent tears, scorch marks, and a suspicious amount of violet staining that confirmed my ichor theory. She smiled, teeth and all. Administrator Vrell, sorry I'm late. There were some complications at the docking ring. Complications. She called an armed incursion by one of the galaxy's most feared predator species complications. Professor Vale, I managed to keep my voice steady, though my translator probably picked up the underlying whistle of anxiety. We received reports of your arrival activities. Are you injured? Should we summon medical personnel? What? This? She gestured vaguely at herself, as if the carnage decorating her person was equivalent to a minor coffee spill. Nah, I'm good. Voidborn always make such a mess, don't they? I don't suppose this station has shower facilities that can handle human biochemistry. I'd hate to terrify the students looking like I just walked off a battlefield. The thing was, that's exactly what she'd done. I guided her through the administrative wing, very carefully, not staring at the way she walked. Humans moved with this peculiar rolling gait, all contained potential energy. Prey species throughout the galaxy found it unsettling. Predator species found it challenging. I, having spent the last 15 cycles coordinating interspecies education initiatives, found it professionally fascinating and personally nerve-wracking. Your quarters have been prepared with appropriate accommodations, I said, pulling up the relevant information. We've installed Earth-standard atmosphere processors, gravity adjusters, and yes, a shower calibrated for human chemical tolerances. Your teaching materials were delivered 2 days ago. The blade? She touched the weapon maglock to her thigh. It didn't look like any ceremonial instrument I'd ever catalogued. The handle showed wear patterns consistent with extensive use, and the blade itself hummed with a frequency that made my antennae ache. Old habit, she said, voice light but eyes scanning every corridor intersection we passed. I taught at Outpost Darwin for 6 years. You learn to keep sharp things handy. I'd read about Outpost Darwin, frontier world, contested territory, 17 documented attacks during her tenure. The report hadn't mentioned she'd personally responded to all 17. That information had come from a side channel, flagged as military intelligence, which really should have told me everything I needed to know about Professor Kira Vale. We passed a cluster of students, mixed species group working on some collaborative project. They looked up at our approach. The Kelvarite female actually dropped her datapad when she saw the human. Two Morphian males pressed themselves against the wall, wings tucked tight. The Arcean in the group, bless their mineral-based courage, just stared with what I'd learned to recognize as their version of fascinated horror. Kira noticed. Of course she noticed. Those predator eyes missed nothing. She waved. Friendly, casual, completely inappropriate given her current appearance. Hey guys, looking forward to class tomorrow? One of the Morphians made a sound I won't transcribe. The Kelverite squeaked something that my translator mercifully rendered as affirmative greeting. After we'd passed, Kira laughed. Actually laughed. This bright sound that seemed fundamentally incompatible with someone who'd just killed 23 Voidborn with apparent ease. I'm going to terrify them, aren't I? Professor, you're currently wearing the remains of several sentient beings who are classified as apex predators in 12 systems. Fair point. She didn't sound particularly concerned. But that's not what I mean. It's the human thing, right? We make people nervous. We'd reached her quarters. I palmed the access panel, and the door slid open to reveal accommodations that had cost the station a small fortune to customize. Earth plants, real ones, not holograms. Furniture scaled to human proportions, a viewport that showed actual space, not the calming false imagery most species preferred. Professor Vale, I turned to face her fully, all 6 eyes focused, which I knew humans found either impressive or creepy. Tomorrow you will be teaching Introduction to Deathworld Biology to a class of 73 students from 19 different species. Many have never seen a human in person. Some come from cultures where your species is, shall we say, mythologized. As monsters? As survivors, I corrected gently, as impossibilities, as the species that looked at a galaxy full of dangers and decided to punch it in the face until it made sense. She was quiet for a moment, and I watched something shift behind her eyes, something tired and old and infinitely determined. You know what the problem is with fighting monsters? She asked, voice dropping to something more serious. Eventually, people start to wonder if you're one too. I didn't have a response to that. What could I say? That she was wrong? I'd seen the security footage. I'd watched her move through that docking bay like death incarnate, all controlled violence and terrifying efficiency. For what it's worth, I said carefully, the students signed up for your class specifically because you're human. They want to learn from you, about Earth, about Deathworld adaptation, about how your species does the impossible. She smiled again, but this time it didn't quite reach her eyes. Then I guess I'd better not disappoint them. She touched the door control, preparing to retreat into her quarters. Thanks for the welcome, Administrator, and sorry again about being late. Professor? I stopped her before the door closed. The Voidborn you eliminated. Our security chief mentioned you didn't use any weapons for the first 12, she corrected absently. Yeah, lost my rifle pretty early on. Ammo conservation became an issue. What did you use? She looked at me like I'd asked the most obvious question in the galaxy. My hands? A pipe I pulled off the wall? There was this really helpful cargo hook at one point. She shrugged. You use what's available. The door slid shut, leaving me standing in the corridor trying to process the casual way she'd just described improvised combat that would have earned a decorated military commendation in any other species. Poke appeared at my side, seemingly from nowhere, which was an impressive feat for someone his size. The students are concerned, he said diplomatically. Did you see her? Station-wide security footage has been circulating. I clicked my mandibles in irritation. Of course it has. The faculty lounge has started a betting pool on how long it takes before someone faints during her first lecture. That's inappropriate. Professor Kelman from Advanced Physics put 50 credits on within the first 10 minutes. I sighed. A gesture I'd picked up from too many years working with human academic liaisons. What did you bet? 5 minutes. Polk's translator couldn't hide his amusement, but only because I'm an optimist. We walked back toward the administrative hub, and I pulled up Professor Vale's personnel file again. Doctorate in Xenobiology from Earth's Geneva Institute. 6 years at Outpost Darwin. Published 47 papers on Deathworld adaptation and survival strategies. 3 Teaching Excellence Awards. Combat certifications that read like a military special forces resume. And tomorrow she'd be standing in front of a classroom full of students who'd been raised on stories about humans, about Earth, about the species that conquered a planet actively trying to kill them, and then decided to apply that same stubborn determination to the stars. The viewport showed Station Theta-Nine's eastern wing, where temporary repairs glowed against the starfield. Voidborn had punched through there, and Kira Vale had punched back harder. I wondered what she'd been like before. Before the fighting, before the frontier, before she'd become the kind of person who could eliminate 23 hostiles and then apologize for being late. Tomorrow, 73 students would find out if the monster they'd heard about in stories was real. I had a feeling they'd discover something much more complicated than that. The lecture hall was designed to accommodate exactly 150 students across 12 different environmental zones. Atmospheric barriers separated oxygen breathers from methane processors. Temperature controls created microclimates for species ranging from Arctic Frostheim natives to volcanic Magmarians, and the gravity plating could be adjusted in sections to prevent the gravitars from accidentally crushing their neighbors. Right now, all 73 registered students were present, which was unusual. First-day attendance typically hovered around 60%, because young academics throughout the galaxy shared one universal trait: they overslept. Not today. I stood at the back observation deck, watching them file in, watching them choose their seats with the kind of strategic thinking usually reserved for military operations. The Kelvarites clustered in the upper tiers, maximizing distance. The Morphians took positions near emergency exits. Even the Ossians, who feared practically nothing due to their silicon-based physiology, positioned themselves with clear sightlines to all entrances. They looked terrified, Poke whispered beside me. They look prepared, I corrected. There's a difference. The chronometer hit exactly 0900 hours. The main entrance doors remained closed. Silence settled over the hall like a physical weight. 73 students, 19 species, all holding their collective breath. The lights dimmed. I hadn't authorized that. I glanced at the environmental controls, but everything showed green. This wasn't a malfunction. Someone had manually adjusted the ambient lighting. A side door opened, the one that led directly from faculty prep rooms. Nobody used that entrance. It was considered poor form, too dramatic, too much like making an entrance instead of simply arriving. Professor Kira Vale walked through that door like she owned the station. She'd cleaned up, obviously. Her hair was still pulled back, but neat now, professional. She wore what I'd learned humans called business casual: dark pants, a button-up shirt in deep blue, practical boots that somehow still looked appropriate for academic settings. The blade was gone from her thigh, though I suspected it wasn't far away. She looked normal, harmless, even, by human standards, which made it worse, somehow. Because every being in that room had seen the security footage. They knew what those hands could do. They knew what existed beneath that professional exterior. She reached the central podium, set down a data slate and looked up at her audience with a smile that could have meant anything. Good morning? Her voice carried easily, projected without obvious effort. Humans had impressive vocal range when they wanted. I'm Professor Kira Vale. Welcome to Introduction to Deathworld Biology, or as I like to call it, How Not to Die on Planets That Really, Really Want to Kill You. A Kelvarite in the third row made a strangled sound. Not quite a faint. I checked my chronometer. 3 minutes, 47 seconds. Polk owed me money. Kira pretended not to notice, pulling up a holographic display that showed a rotating planet. Blue and green and white. Beautiful in the way that poisonous creatures often were. This is Earth, she said. My home world. Current classification, Class 12 Deathworld, which puts it in the top 0.03% of lethal planetary environments in charted space. Gravity 1.0 standard, atmosphere 21% oxygen, which I understand many of you find alarmingly combustible. Surface temperature ranges from -89 to +56 Celsius. Weather patterns include hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, and something we call Tuesday. A nervous laugh rippled through the Morphian section. Good, laughter meant they were processing, not panicking. Now, I know what you're thinking. Kira zoomed the hologram in, showing terrain features. Mountains, oceans, forests, deserts. You're thinking, okay, tough planet, sure, but what makes it special? Lots of worlds have harsh conditions. She tapped the display, and suddenly the hologram populated with life forms. Thousands of them, millions. Every ecological niche filled with something trying to survive. Earth doesn't just have harsh conditions, she said, voice taking on a quality I couldn't quite identify. Pride? Frustration? Love? Earth has harsh conditions and approximately 8.7 million species, all competing for the same resources, all evolving faster than you can document them, all developing increasingly creative ways to kill each other. Another tap, and specific species highlighted. A great white shark, a saltwater crocodile, a hippopotamus, which looked deceptively peaceful until you read its lethality statistics. We have apex predators in every biome, oceans full of things with too many teeth, land animals that can run faster, hit harder, and outlast anything their size has any right to. And that's just the megafauna. She grinned, and I saw several students flinch. The microscopic life is where things get really interesting. A Threxian in the front row, braver than most, raised a tentacle. Professor Vale, the assignment brief mentioned you'd be teaching survival strategies, but Earth is your home world. You evolved there. How can you teach adaptation to an environment you're naturally suited for? Excellent question. I'd wondered the same thing. Kira's expression shifted. Something darker crept in, something that reminded everyone in the room exactly what she'd done yesterday at the docking bay. Because humans aren't naturally suited for Earth, she said quietly. That's the secret nobody tells you about Deathworlders. We didn't conquer our planet through natural advantages. We did it through sheer bloody-minded refusal to die. She pulled up another image, a human but different, more primitive, heavier brow ridge, different posture. This is Homo erectus, one of our evolutionary ancestors. 2 million years ago they were prey, not predators. Prey. Things hunted us. Things with bigger teeth, stronger muscles, better senses. We were slow, relatively weak, and our infants took forever to mature, which is a terrible survival strategy on a planet trying to kill you. The hologram shifted, showing a timeline. Species appearing, evolving, going extinct. A cascade of failure, punctuated by tiny pockets of success. So how did we survive? Kira asked, looking around the room, making eye contact with students who immediately regretted their seating choices. We couldn't outrun the predators, couldn't outfight them, couldn't hide from them. Anyone want to guess? Silence. 73 students, suddenly very interested in their data slates. We cheated, Kira said, grinning again. We used tools, fire, language. We built tribes, developed cooperation strategies, and most importantly, we learned to adapt faster than anything else on the planet. While other species spent millennia evolving better claws, we spent decades inventing better weapons. They developed pack tactics. We developed military strategy. They claimed territories. We built cities. She was pacing now, moving across the platform with that distinctive human gait. Several students tracked her movement with the instinctive awareness of prey watching a predator circle. Deathworld survival isn't about being the strongest or the fastest, she continued. It's about being the most stubborn. It's about looking at a planet actively trying to kill you and saying, no, actually, I think I'll stay. It's about taking every single disadvantage nature gave you and turning it into an advantage through sheer determination and spite. An Ossian raised a crystalline appendage. Professor, you make it sound almost adversarial. Don't most species develop in harmony with their environment? Kira laughed, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Harmony? On Earth, harmony lasted approximately 30 seconds before something decided to eat something else. Our entire evolutionary history is one long story of aggressive problem solving. Take pregnancy, for example. She pulled up a biological diagram that made several students audibly uncomfortable. Human gestation takes 9 months. 9 months of vulnerability, of reduced mobility, of increased caloric needs. On a death world, that should be a death sentence. But humans developed social structures specifically to protect pregnant individuals and infants. We became collectively responsible for survival. One human alone, terrible odds. Humans working together, we took over the entire planet. Polk leaned over to me. She's good at this. He wasn't wrong. Despite the fear, despite the uncomfortable subject matter, every student was paying attention, completely focused. She had them hooked. This semester, Kira said, we're going to study 17 different Deathworld environments. We'll analyze survival strategies, adaptation mechanisms, and the kind of creative problem-solving that keeps you alive when everything around you wants you dead. We'll do field simulations, case studies and practical exercises designed to make you think like someone from a hostile world. Amorphian raised a wing tentatively. Will these exercises be dangerous? Define dangerous, Kira replied, which was absolutely not the reassuring answer anyone wanted. Look, I'm not going to throw you into actual combat situations, but I am going to push you outside your comfort zones. Because that's where learning happens. That's where you discover capabilities you didn't know you had. She pulled up the course syllabus, scrolling through topics. Hostile flora identification. Predator evasion tactics. Resource management under duress. Emergency shelter construction. Improvised medicine. Psychological resilience training. It read like a military survival manual, not an academic curriculum. I know this looks intense, Kira said, and something softened in her expression. I know many of you are scared of me, of the material, of what this class represents, and that's okay. Fear is healthy. Fear keeps you alive, but fear also limits you if you let it control your decisions. She sat on the edge of the podium, a casual gesture that somehow made her seem more approachable. Story time, she announced. 5 years ago I was teaching at Outpost du Darwin, Frontier Colony. Contested space, all the fun stuff. We had students from 40 different species, most of whom had never left their home worlds before. Safe worlds, garden worlds, places where the most dangerous thing they'd encountered was a mildly inconvenient weather pattern. The room was absolutely silent now. 3 months into the semester we had an incursion. Raider group, looking to strip the colony for resources. Our military escort was off station. Communication arrays were jammed. We had maybe 20 minutes before they breached our defenses. I remembered this incident. It had made headlines across 7 sectors. The Outpost Darwin Miracle, they'd called it. I had 70 students in my care, Kira continued. 70 terrified kids who'd signed up for an academic experience, not a combat situation. And you know what happened? A Kelverite whispered. What happened? Kira smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. They fought back. Not with weapons. They didn't have weapons. But with everything I'd taught them about Deathworld survival, about using your environment, about creative problem solving, about refusing to be a victim. Those students from safe worlds, with no combat training, held that facility for 47 minutes, until reinforcements arrived. 47 minutes of pure, stubborn determination. She stood, looking around the room at all those frightened faces. That's what this class is really about. Not turning you into soldiers, not making you dangerous, but teaching you that you're capable of more than you think. That survival isn't about natural advantages, it's about adaptability, determination, and the willingness to try something crazy when the safe options stop working. The chronometer chimed, signaling the end of class. 2 hours had evaporated like nothing. Your first assignment, Kira said, pulling up a file transfer notification that pinged every student's data slate simultaneously, is to research your own species' evolutionary history. Find the challenges your ancestors faced. Identify the adaptations that allowed survival. Then write me 500 words on what that teaches you about your own capabilities. Due next week. Students began gathering their materials, moving slowly, carefully, still wary, but something had shifted. They weren't running. They weren't panicking. They were thinking. I watched Kira field questions from the brave few who approached the podium. Watched her answer with patience and humor. Watched her somehow make the terrifying seem manageable. She's going to be a problem, Polk said beside me. Why? Because the students are going to love her. He was right, of course. I could see it already, in the way they leaned in despite their fear. in the questions that shifted from "Can I drop this class?" to "Can I audit your advanced seminar?" Humans. Impossible. Terrifying. Inspiring creatures. Professor Kira Vale had fought monsters at dawn, and now standing in that classroom, she was teaching 73 students that they could too. The betting pool in the faculty lounge was going to be very disappointed. Nobody had fainted, but something more important had happened. They'd started believing